everybody. Welcome to Narativ Live with a very, very lovely Ellie Leonard, who's here with us today. One of my favorite times of every week is to spend time with Ellie Leonard because she's very knowledgeable, very smart, knows all the stuff you want to know about Epstein and other things, but is also just a terrific person. And it's fun to hang out with you. So hi, Ellie, how are you?
I'm good. I've been packing all day. We're catching an Uber at 4:10 tomorrow morning because I somehow picked the wrong airport. I picked the airport that's not 20 minutes from our house. I picked the one that's an hour away. So we have a 7 a.m. flight and we're hipping and skipping out of here.
That's because the World Cup is coming, or is there another reason for it?
Not quite. This one's just spring break, but it's it's a good reason to get out of town.
Hey, anything is a good reason to get out of town, and spring break is one of those things. So we won't keep you too long then, because you got a busy schedule. You're all got to pack and everything. We have a lot to talk about. Let's start off with what's going on with Pam Bondi, who just until recently was the Attorney General of the United States and was under subpoena and was going to come see the Oversight Committee in the House, and she was meant to testify as early as next week, and now she's not. Because she says that she doesn't need to. According to the new Attorney General, who's Donald Trump's former defense attorney, Todd Blanche, it's okay with him because she no longer needs to. She's no longer the Attorney General. I'm paraphrasing what's here in the Rolling Stones article, but this reporting is not the only time we've seen it. It's certainly appeared in many places. Everybody seems to think that that's okay. Well, not everybody, because people on the committee, like Mace, are saying, I wrote the subpoena and I wrote it to her in her name, not to her as the Attorney General. Therefore, she should show up. It certainly seems to be that Hakeem Jeffries this morning said he was determined to make sure Pam Bondi does testify. So that's all still up in the air, whether she will do it or not. But what's your take on this? I mean, my sense is that you've got somebody here who's involved in a cover-up, a huge cover-up, the biggest cover-up in American history, who is being allowed by the party and the president that is doing the covering up to walk away from it.
Right. Well, I mean, of course, we knew she was going to try to walk away from it. Whether or not she can legally remains to be seen. But again, I heard the same thing that you heard. They said we didn't subpoena the Attorney General. We subpoenaed Pam Bondi. And so, like, it whether she's Attorney General or not, she knows what she knows. She's seen what she's seen. She knows what she was asked to not present or to not give to the American people or to redact. Like, she knows all that information. So whether she's the Attorney General or not really is a moot point at this point. But I was going to ask you a question, because this is something that I've heard floating around, and I don't know if it's true. So I wanted to ask you if I have heard that as Attorney General of the United States, she would not be able to plead the fifth, whereas as a civilian, she can. Do you know if that's true?
I've heard that too. I don't know if that's actually the law, but I've heard that that's the thing that they're trying to get around. Look, there's no doubt in my mind she was going to perjure herself, or she was, and then she had no other choice. She was going to lie about the president,
which is why they fired her.
Which is why she sort of was fired, but she really quit. Right? She was like at this point where they realized if she stays in the job, she probably can't plead the fifth. Therefore, she's got to go in there and lie. That's perjury. That means she could go to jail down the line. We don't want her to do that. Now, I think she can go in and plead the fifth, but it's still going to be unacceptable to everybody that someone who's in that position isn't testifying about her time as Attorney General honestly and legally, because she broke the law. And clearly this is a sort of an admission that she broke the law in my mind. The fact that she's not willing to do this, the fact that she quit her job, all this stuff. Well, that says that you lied, basically, or weren't willing to lie, or you were involved in a crime. Now, what that crime is hard to tell, whether it was just the crime of covering up the Epstein files, or whether she knows even more that she's not revealing. We'll never find out, it seems, unless she does testify at some point. And I hope she does, because it's important that America gets its arms around what really happened. Even if people don't land up going to jail for all of this, we really need to understand what the Jeffrey Epstein saga, how it relates to Donald Trump, how it relates to everybody else, happened to us, and what the impact of that is.
Right. And we've watched her lie in real time. I mean, that was the gift to the American people, is watching Pam Bondi lie in real time, saying she had something on her desk, then no, she didn't have it on her desk. And then here are the Epstein files, which really have nothing in them. The case is closed, except for here's 3.5 million files filled with all sorts of, corroborating information and convicting information. I think namely, like beyond what she knows is in the files, we need to know from her what she asked the FBI and all those agents, those 1,000 agents that sat in there for however many hours a day, what she asked them to redact. We need to know what is still in there. She knows all the numbers. She knows all the redactions. She knows how many times Donald Trump is in those files. And she knows what she asked the FBI agents to do, what she asked them to cover and redact. And those are questions that she needs to answer specifically to her and her accountability beyond what Donald Trump has done, beyond what's in the Epstein files. Like, what did she ask people to do?
And who ordered her to do it? Did it come from the president himself? Did the president of the United States say to her, you've got to cover this stuff up? Because she went to him at some point and said, you're all over the Epstein files. We know that much.
Mm-hmm.
So when she went there, did he say to her, you can't let that out, you've got to cover it up, or what? Because if that's a conspiracy, then, if the president of the United States is ordering his attorney general to order the FBI and to order the DOJ officials to cover up what he did, now you've got a conspiracy to obstruct justice at the highest levels of American politics. It's the biggest scandal we've had since Watergate. It is very much like Watergate. So it's significant. And her just being excused by Todd Blanche or the GOP or anybody else from testifying is, it's just unacceptable. It's just beyond reproach of this.
Right.
I mean, unless we've now accepted, and maybe we have as a society, that the rule of law doesn't apply. And depending on who you are, you get treated differently. But if we're still the same America that we used to be, then, they should be able to go through this process and tell America what they've done. And we need to find out the truth. And if need be, he needs to be impeached. And she would have been too.
Yes. And I also want to know what conversation they had that made everybody flip. Because if you look through the text message, or not the text messages, but like the tweets and things, I did a long list of analytical tweets a long time ago that just showed the progression of how Kash Patel changed his mind, where he was saying that, Trump will release the files, Biden's hiding the files, this is going to end everything. And then he starts to say there are no files, never mind, look away. I want to know what the conversation was behind closed doors that made everybody flip or required them to flip, or how that went. Like, I want to know somebody who was in that room and know how that went. And what it
Dan
was like.
Bongino knows. I'm telling you, Dan Bongino knows. We've got to get Dan Bongino in here because, he was probably the only person who's going to give us the real story ever. Mm-hmm. But truthfully, I mean, what do you think it is? They all found out he was a mobster, that he was tied to an intelligence operation, that there was much more than just, sexual crimes against young women, that there was probably a whole lot of criminal activity involving all sorts of things, and that he did have sort of connections, whether they're intelligence connections or other connections to power, that got him off getting in trouble for all of this. And that's true for Trump too. I mean, look what he's getting away with on a daily basis, and no one seems to be able to stop him. Maybe we don't like that as a society, but it just seems that's where we are.
Well, I would remind people that despite what the Supreme Court decided about his immunity from crimes, just in this week and the things that he's said and done that are highly illegal, he's not immune to that. Like federal crimes, felonies while in office, those are not under that umbrella of immunity. And also the idea of like...
Nor state crimes, I think. Aren't state crimes excluded? Yeah, I think so.
Probably, yeah. It's a very fine line. It's more like the things he's already done while in office, he cannot be convicted for those things. But so there's the idea of getting him out of office, and will the midterms affect that? And then will a full investigation actually ensue when that happens? If we get more people in there who are more objective, or even who aren't objective, who just want to go after Trump, like we will see more of those files one way or another, and then potentially get this show on the road. But yeah, it's disheartening to just see how much one single person can get away with and have no recourse. It's amazing.
Bondi's been a loyalist to Trump for years, decades, in fact. There was one event that she hosted, I think, for Donald Trump as a fundraiser way back when she was just the Attorney General of Florida. And you get the sense then that she was part of that whole thing. It was at Mar-a-Lago. Rudy Giuliani was there. It was one of these really typical Mar-a-Lago events of that insider crew of compromised, mobby kind of figures that ended up, taking over the American executive. And so she knows the game. She knows who she's involved. I mean, she didn't
Yeah.
just take this job without knowing what she was signing up for.
Yeah.
I mean, was it a lot for her? Maybe it was a lot for her when she got in there, but she certainly has not gone to the point where she perjured herself yet. Because remember during that one testimony that she did in front of that committee, where she was like, "Oh, look at the Dow is 550,000."
Look at the Dow. Sitting in front of all the survivors, but I can't do anything for it.
But the reason why she did the Dow is she had nothing else to say. She couldn't say, well, the president didn't commit any crimes, because she knows he committed crimes. So the only thing she could say is stop going after the president because of the Dow. But in fact, there is another sort of, confession of sorts in that entire answer. Anyhow, we'll be watching this, and I'm talking to Scott McFarlane at 4:15. He's very plugged into the scene, and he'll know exactly what's going on with the committee and their attempt to get Pam Bondi to testify. It'll be really interesting to see what happens. Now, onto the Michael Wolff saga, which is almost as interesting as the Michael Cohen saga. Did you see that Michael Cohen was mentioned in the Trump brief, the appeal? That came out earlier, and I didn't read it in detail, but just reading through the headline, unfortunately, just the headline, so I might have it wrong, but it's something about, that Donald Trump's appeal he's in, and it quotes Michael Cohen around the storm. So not unexpected. We said there was a deal likely with him getting a pardon in exchange for him turning back on his evidence that he gave during the Stormy Daniels case. But, that's Michael Cohen. That's just one piece of it. Now let's talk about
Michael Avenatti just got out of jail, or he's about to, and I figure that's just going to stir the pot, and everybody's going to start fighting, and we'll have lots to talk about again.
There was a time when Michael Avenatti wanted to talk to me a lot, but that was a long time ago. So, that's how
Never
I felt.
Wanted to talk to
another operative. Let's talk about Michael Wolff, because Michael Wolff is, if anyone has fallen the most out of the scandal, publicly in America, Michael Wolff has probably taken the biggest dive in credibility you can imagine, because he's gone from being the guy who was booked on almost every show every time someone mentioned the words Epstein, to now being sort of a persona non grata on many shows. In fact, the only place I've ever seen him recently was on Daily Beast, which is where he works. And you've been doing a lot of dig deeping into his emails that were found in the Epstein files, much more than anybody else, I think. And you've been discovering a lot about the relationship between Epstein and Bannon and Wolff and that whole crew. Tell us what you've been finding out, and then we'll take a look at some of these emails.
Sure. So I am at the halfway point in his emails. I have been working on these 4 weeks. I keep thinking that everything's going to be duplicates, and they're just brand new emails. Like, there is a trove of conversation between these men, and he became the person that Epstein let his guard down with the most. So you get to see sort of like the true Jeffrey Epstein in these conversations. And the true Jeffrey Epstein is very neurotic. He's very self-conscious. He very clearly has, learning delays, dyslexia. He is self-conscious about people not calling him back or including him. And so you see this kind of shriveled figure of this crime kingpin that we think of in the Epstein case. But really in that we have, so far, we have 10 years of conversations between these two guys, and they are very, every year is pretty, 10 years so far. I'm down to 2009. It's all on email. Yes. And so I'm going to go through text messages after I finish the emails. So we got 1,800 pages of emails.
Wow.
And so far they start in 2009. I expect that they start a little earlier, but then we run into the barrier of people not using email as much. But they are consistent. They are traveling. They are talking about, a big piece of it is Michael Wolff is writing the book on Trump, and Epstein is helping him get information about Donald Trump. And then he's helping him edit the book on Donald Trump. And then, Michael Wolff turns around and sells the book, and he makes $13 million. He was very invested in Jeffrey Epstein because he knew that it could make him a lot of money, but he also was of that mindset of being close to someone who had a huge Rolodex because he wanted to have a huge Rolodex. It was just like Donald Trump. It was just like Jeffrey Epstein. It was these people who are people hunters, and they just want to have this giant stack of contacts because Michael Wolff never felt better than when he could connect Jeffrey Epstein to someone that he knew who was big and important. That was always a good day for Michael Wolff. And a big one of those was Steve Bannon. There was a lot of three-way conversations between the two men, and then there was a lot of like conversations, behind the curtain with Epstein and Wolff about Steve Bannon and how disorganized he was and horrible to talk to. But then Michael Wolff decided he wanted to be on board with Steve Bannon's documentary that he was doing on Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh, that's really
and then
interesting.
He was writing,
so Michael Wolff was cooperating with Bannon on the documentary?
Yes.
That's interesting.
And he was trying to help market it.
Why do you, to market it?
Yeah, he wanted to help market it. He wanted to help with the project. He started, they definitely were talking about the documentary because he was also writing a book about Epstein. That was the goal, was to write a book about Epstein before Epstein was arrested and ultimately died. So this was like a big comeback for Epstein, and Wolff, he was predicting that Epstein was going to be the biggest thing, and he wanted to be a part of it because he also knew that Trump was the one guy that Epstein would talk about, and he wanted that vein of information for the rest of his career.
Thought he was going to be the biggest thing in terms of what? He thought he was going to be resurrected as a...
Yes.
Really? He thought he was going to successfully resurrected?
Yes,
wow.
And he spent most of his time trying to make that happen. He would call all the magazines, he would call all the publishers trying to figure out, I heard there's a book coming out, I heard there's an article coming out, and then he would try to crush the article that was coming out or the thing that was coming out, or discredit the journalist or discredit the author. And then he would have his PR people go out and try to spread that information. He was trying to resurrect Woody Allen's career and create this love story with Soon Yi that he could then write about to crush Dylan Farrow's story. And that he spent all his time, catching and killing these true stories about pedophiles and the things that they had done and their sexual crimes and their
What's the incentive there for him? Why would he do something like that?
Well, Epstein helped him write a book that he made $13 million on, and he knew that vein of information was going to make him money for the rest of his life. And so I think he was cultivating that. He was cultivating that with Steve Bannon, and he was building his empire. And then ultimately, when Epstein died, he released a book. It's something about famous. I forget what the title is called, but it did really, really poorly because that book was supposed to be about Epstein. And instead, when all the Epstein stuff came out, he just gave Epstein a chapter and tried to make him look like he was a terrible person. But ultimately, it was a book about the comeback of Epstein. That was his goal.
Which was the movie?
Yeah, which was the movie and the book.
Yeah.
It was a book.
What was the name again?
So, I forget what the book is. It's his book that came out in 2021, and it's something famous. But Epstein is like the final chapter in it. But it's written completely different as Epstein being a bad guy, and he got all the insight. What he's saying on the Daily Beast.
Okay, so we've got these emails that you've done. There's a lot here. 10 years of a relationship. I don't share. I agree with everything you're saying in terms of their sort of symbiotic relationship with each other. But I also, I view this group as a criminal syndicate. I don't view them as just a group of friends that are just hanging out, or colleagues that are sharing information with each other. This is a group of people who are in the world of criminal activity. They're connected to a lot of crime. They're involved in a lot of crime. They're making a lot of money off that crime. And in that case, I don't view this as sort of a voluntary, hey, let's be buddies and I'm going to help you. It's more like organizational. That
transactional, very transactional.
I need to help you out because you're going to be making me money next month or whatever it is. It's maybe something like that, or even maybe something more organized. And I always include Donald Trump in the same circle. And I know is Michael Wolff friends or foe of Donald Trump is a big question. And I think your view of it is that he's really a foe, but
I don't know. I don't know that he's really a foe. I think that he, he wouldn't certainly act like a foe. I know that there was a huge backlash when his Fire and Fury book came out, and there was backlash against Bannon, and Trump tried to discredit him. But I think ultimately Trump liked the book. I think he liked the bad publicity because he likes all publicity. And Bannon and Wolff continued to have time in the White House. He had emails where he's like, I can't hang out tonight. I'm going to be at the White House until 3 a.m. And I thought, who goes to the White House until 3 a.m.? Like, what? Why?
Well, Michael Wolff does, and the president stays up late and he does a lot of his business late. But it's true that the book is sort of critical of Donald Trump, but it isn't really the whole story. And as we've been describing through the Maison Le Amate, they are that transaction isn't fully described in Michael Wolff's book. That there are elements of that taken out of there. So in fact, and other business transactions which he told me about that happened between Epstein and Trump are nowhere to be seen in any of his books. Well, if you know all this stuff, why aren't you revealing it? Because I would like to know. Right. I mean, a lot of people have a deep interest in this. So let's take a look at some of these emails. Here we go. We are going back to 2017. Yeah. And what are we looking at here?
So this is Michael Wolff wanting to meet with the Saudis, and he's trying to get. I don't know if this STD is initials, because they do very often use, like MBS, they use initials all the time. I don't know if that's just a misspelling or if that's a name, but he's trying to meet with Epstein's connections in the Saudis, and Epstein's telling him, I will try, but they're very, very private and they're very sketched out. And he says here, I understand if it would help 100% off the record, and I will share with them all I know about White House operation, which that obviously, sent up some red flags immediately.
Yeah, that
that
line certainly indicates, wow, is he spying on behalf of the Saudis, on behalf of the Saudis, on the White House? That's sort of what you get out of that sentence. But it could mean anything, of course. But
I've passed it around to some legal minds and been like, how do you read this objectively? Like, if you read this, what do you think? And they said, it's like a 5%, maybe it's innocent, but like it really feels nefarious. Why would it be 100 off? If it's innocent, why would it need to be totally off the record? That's the question with that.
Yeah. I mean, and also, they would know. They would have their insight into the White House already. They have huge connections there with the White House. Right. So, what are they getting from Michael Wolff that they're not getting from Jared Kushner or anybody else who's close to the White House and the MBS crowd? Now, it could be somebody else, because you said the initials are STB. Where is that?
Yeah, well, it says down at the bottom, it says the STD gun shy. And so I don't know if that's
so I think it's the Sultan whatever. That's why I think that is the STD.
Sultan bin Sulayem, but Sultan bin Sulayem. So that wouldn't be that Sultan.
Yeah.
But I mean,
could be. I mean, it could be.
He was trying to cultivate a relationship, because in the emails that I was just reading before I hopped on here, all of Epstein's buddies, MBS included, wanted a signed copy of Michael Wolff's book. They really wanted his book and they were very excited about it. So like he was connecting him to some of these people who didn't like Donald Trump necessarily, and could potentially write about that, or who knew that Michael Wolff had information about Donald Trump that nobody else had.